Hello and welcome to Future Thinking from Stylus. Today we're continuing our discussions around inclusivity and equality with a focus on racial inequality in the beauty industry, where brands have got it wrong and how they can get it right. To discuss this, I'm joined by Charlotte Williams, founder of London-based SevenSix agency, which develops and champions impactful and diverse marketing solutions for brands and BAME influencers. And also with us is Lisa Payne, Stylus's senior editor of beauty. Welcome to you both. So first, Charlotte, could you tell us a little bit about what you do with your agency and also about your work as an influencer?
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me on. So SevenSix Agency is a diversity-focused influencer marketing agency. We work with brands in a multitude of ways, but mainly pairing them with the right influencers for their campaigns. So we do that through a network that we have of over 200 influencers who are people of colour, and then we also manage a roster of now, I think I want to say 6 influencers, which is growing by the week, it seems. And we pair the brands with the correct influencers for their campaigns.
Fantastic. And in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, you posted a video to Instagram, which has now been viewed almost 100,000 times, addressing, well, maybe you could explain, you could discuss.
Yeah. You know what? I haven't looked at that video since I posted it, actually. I posted, so I forgot to mention, so I am an influencer of sorts, as well as being an influencer marketing agency and agent. So I've been in the industry for around 9 years, starting with having a blog around beauty, and then moved to hair care, and then kind of now it's more lifestyle. I don't blog anymore, but focus on my Instagram. And I've, since launching the agency last year, I've posted a few race-related pieces of content, but mainly focused around the advertising industry, because that's, you know, where I sit, that's my job. And I never really talk about anything personal because I don't see myself as that type of influencer. You know, I like to talk about hair and beauty, sustainability, and then sometimes about my job. But I posted that video on the Sunday after the death of George Floyd, after speaking to quite a few family members and friends about just how sad I was. And so I'm mixed race, so I have white family and black family, and also Asian family, you know, through marriage, lots of different people in my family. But speaking to my white family and friends, and them not understanding why I was so sad and so upset and just kind of crippled with my emotions. And my sister felt the same. And my company, we are a team of 4 black women, and we had to take some time off. And I just had to kind of explain to people, you know, this happened in America, it happened to a man that we don't know. But when I see that man, videos and pictures of that man being killed, I see my brothers, I see my dad, I see my uncles. When I see that, I see inequality that is every day. And it's a guy just going to a shop, and before that it was, you know, a woman sleeping in her bed, and before that it was someone going for a walk. And it was, I think, having to explain to people why I was so sad, and not even sad, I don't even know what the emotion was. I think I was just traumatized, distressed and angry. And it wasn't just because one person was killed, it was because lots of people on a weekly basis that we are aware of have been killed over lockdown specifically. And then we're seeing stats in local to us in our country showing that people from who are BAME or from the non-white community suffering more from coronavirus and its effects at a much higher rate, and just everything all at once, and the government kind of pushing back and not wanting to share stats because they didn't want to cause an uproar. And it was just so much in one small period of time that I just felt so overwhelmed. And I know that a lot of people felt the same, and I was speaking to friends and family who were also feeling the same and just couldn't put into words why. So I created that video to try and explain why I felt so overwhelmed with emotion. But what was interesting is I didn't expect it to, it was just a video for basically my mates to be like, okay guys, group session, this is what's going on. I feel really rubbish right now, and these things happen all the time, and you might not be aware of it because you don't see it, because you see things in a different way. And my partner's white, and since we've been together for nearly 6 years, and in that time I've had to explain different things to him, and now he's hyper aware of things that go on, and you know, ways I'm spoken to, and different things that happen in different situations. And it's become a bit easier for him to understand now that we don't live the same life, and I don't live the same life as, say, his sisters. But it's an education that he had to have, because it's something that's not obvious to him, and something that's not just, we don't speak about it really, because I don't feel like I have to. But sometimes when something comes up and it's a microaggression or something might actually be racist, but not knowing the historical context to it, will have to be like, do you know what, that made me feel uncomfortable, and this is why. So that the video was that, basically.
And have the conversations that you've been having in your work life changed since the George Floyd murder? I mean, are the people you're working with, are there challenges and needs and questions changing as well?
Do you know what's interesting? I am always, and I always have been, quite unapologetic about how I speak about race. I've always been the kind of person that if you don't understand something, you can always ask me. And if you don't feel comfortable, there's Google. And we can, between us, can figure it out. So I talk to people in a way that I expect them to understand, knowing that they might not always, but they can find out little things. So if I say something that, you know, might trigger, like, oh, I'm not sure what that means, they can write a note and look it up later. If they don't feel comfortable, bring it up. But I always talk to people on like the same level. So I feel like now I've got a bit more understanding. So when I talk to people, and I'm quite direct about race, because I don't think it's anything to be apologetic about. I don't think it's something we should whisper about. I think when people talk about anything race related, it should be a normal conversation, as if you were talking about walking the dog. You know, it shouldn't be something that we feel uncomfortable talking about, because I've had to talk about it for the last 30 years with my, you know, my family and just my life. So I feel like everyone has the opportunity to talk about things. So I don't think the conversation has changed on my end. I just think the understanding has changed, which is really welcomed, because I know there have been times in the past where I've said things and people don't quite get it first time. And I don't expect people to, and that's fine, but they felt uncomfortable to ask questions. And I feel like now people are asking a lot more questions and are more open to understanding. And if I throw a stat, I love a stat. So if I throw a stat out there, then they get written down now. I can visually see people on Zoom like, oh, that's a good one, because they know that they'll need it. Whereas before it was just like, oh, that's interesting. Okay, move on. So I think the conversation hasn't quite changed necessarily, because my job is to talk about diversity, be that race or any type. So I'm always having the same conversation. I just think it's being, I just feel like it's more of a conversation now than a one-sided dialogue from myself.
So there's more of an understanding now of, or at least an awareness of the sort of more long-term structural systemic issues that, you know, you're probably been aware of your whole life, but perhaps, you know, your white friends or clients have not been as focused on before, because it's now becoming much more obvious to people how deep-rooted some of these issues are and how subtle some of them are, so nuanced some of them are. In that respect, I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are in terms of how, you know, brands have responded, because although there is clearly a sort of unequivocal response from many in terms of, you know, we stand against this kind of inequality, there are these much larger issues and much more subtle issues of racism in everyday life, and the microaggressions that you were talking about, which are perhaps a little harder for brands to address or tackle. I wonder whether you think that there's been a substantial response, or whether some of it is mere surface response.
I think it's quite difficult to say. So we are in contact with a lot of brands at the moment doing a lot behind the scenes, and I know that this is something that they're not talking about, that we will never talk about, and it's just something that we're getting on with and doing. So at surface level, I hesitate to judge any of the brands because they might be doing loads behind the scenes. You don't know. I have calls every day, and if it's not with the brand as an agency and us working with them, it's them pitching for me to work with them as an influencer, and then I have to ask them the hard questions of like, okay, so what does your diversity policy look like? What's on your agenda for anti-racism? Have you supported the Black Lives Matter movement? What's your next steps going forward? And I hit them with these questions, and it's not because I'm trying to be difficult, it's because it's important. And we always, as a team, we always have tried to understand the internal structure of brands before we go wild with working with them. So I think there are lots of brands who have done things like created social media posts in support, but then not, I know for a fact, haven't done anything to back it up. There are some that have done social media posts to support, then not known what to do to back it up, and then got in contact with the agency, and then we've created an agenda for them and an action plan, which is fantastic. And it's something that we are continuing to do now, and we get at least one request every day from like a really great brand who want to actively make a change. So that's really exciting. But I think it's really difficult with social media to understand and to know what is actually happening, and its language is quite, as you said, it's quite nuanced. So what they say they might be doing might not necessarily mean what you think it means. So I think we're in a bit of a weird situation where anyone can pretty much say anything, but we won't know until the next time round. The next person who dies and then makes it into it gets sent viral across the internet, and then we all are aware of it, and there's another uproar, which I'm sure will happen in a few months, and then, which is actually really sad to say, but it's the truth, and then we'll see who didn't do well last time round and who needs to make a change. So yeah, it's really difficult.
Well, so Lisa, it is difficult, and I wonder whether, from your perspective, what are you seeing in terms of brands truly implementing practices that demonstrate their commitment to inclusivity, especially in beauty? Are brands doing it well? Who's doing it well?
I think beauty is quite an interesting industry, because in terms of diversity and inclusion, it's seen as being in the forefront of everything. If we think of fashion, everyone's like, oh, fashion's like not diverse, there's no inclusion. Beauty, because of the shades, foundations and skincare, people assume it's more diverse because people are using mixed race and black models, and they're on the surface doing a good job. But I'm seeing a lot of brands who are creating really strong agendas. I don't know, I know this from the outside in, so I don't know if I can I don't think I should name them, but they're doing a really good job at listening to their audiences and then sitting down with their teams, which I think, especially in the beauty with the retail space, is quite interesting. Brands who have their internal team, but then also have their, in the head office, but then also have their shops, and then hearing the kind of things that go on the shop floor that they need to deal with. Like, I think Anthropology, not a beauty brand, but one to talk about, Sephora has also had some call outs, and people talking about the difference of what it looks like in head office to what the shop floor looks like. But I think, we are seeing, us personally as an agency, are seeing some really interesting conversations going on, and some really surprising reactions of people being educated. So we had a call a couple of weeks ago with a brand who wanted to talk about diversifying their marketing and becoming more inclusive in terms of their strategy. And I threw out some really basic stats that I just assumed everyone would know because they're wide on the internet, about how African and Caribbean women spend 80% more on cosmetics than their white counterparts, and in terms of skincare, it's 50% more. And these are stats that are just on the internet. I just see them all the time in articles, so I just assume it's like a common knowledge thing. And then I was talking about how their foundation shades aren't inclusive because they only have like 10, whereas we for our influencers that we manage, we wouldn't work with someone who has less than 40. 50 is like my aim, but not many people have more than 50 shades. So 40 is like the bare minimum. And they were like, whoa, that's insane. And I was just like, well, there are more than 10 shades of people in the world. But I was saying, you know, if you marketed properly, then you would do really well and you'd make loads of money, because Black people clearly spend a lot of money on cosmetics and on beauty in general. So you just need to like tweak your marketing to get those people. And yeah, so we're having really interesting conversations that are ongoing, that are really surprising, because I feel like we all must have this. We all have information that we assume everybody knows, and then they don't. And then you're like, oh, wow, okay, cool. So that's what we're looking at the moment, and just seeing, yeah, lots of different brands, big and small, surprisingly some big ones, who their teams don't have this info to hand. So we're doing a lot of focus groups and workshops internally to help change that, which is just so interesting.
Yeah, brilliant. And Lisa, from your perspective, what are you seeing?
Well, I mean, I think it's quite a tricky one, obviously, because social media has kind of allowed people to kind of put up the black square and then kind of say, well, we'll do some stuff to help, donations, but following up on these things is difficult. And as you say, Sephora, they did the 15% pledge, so they'd have 15% Black-owned brands in their stores, which is obviously great, but obviously there's also been some, you know, backlash against the realities of their stores. So it's more about finding brands that are just genuinely looking to say, you know, we're seeing this, we're listening, we're understanding, you know, we potentially haven't done the best in the past, but we're hoping to change, and this is what we're going to do to try and change that. So I think that in terms of what I've been most impressed by is Warmer Beauty, which is a London based, but they started the founder of that started the Pull Up or Shut Up challenge, which I think is less about the product itself. You know, their product is very inclusive and they've got some super diverse marketing, which is great, but they kind of were trying to look at something a little bit more systemic about the employees. So trying to ask businesses to openly, you know, acknowledge how many Black employees they have, and lots of brands have responded. And one of the ones that I think that we wrote about recently was Clinique, that pledged to boost Black employees' access to professional development, to partner with Black influencers, and sort of request input from Black creatives a little bit more, which I think is, you know, only a really good thing in terms of sort of spreading racially diverse and inclusive messages within a brand from the ground up. So I think that Pull Up or Shut Up was one of the sort of stuff that we were really excited about. But then equally Glossier, you know, which isn't a overly typically diverse on the outside brand, or at least the assumption isn't, but you know, they did a grant for Black-owned and businesses that needed some funding, and initiatives like that kind of go a little bit further than just the black square to sort of say, look, we're listening. It's also about, oh, we're in a position of power. How can we help? How can we take our some of our money, some of our privilege, and some of our position of power, and help the people and the brands to sort of spread their voices as well.
Yeah, it's interesting when you mention, aside from Clinique, the brands you mentioned, I think, are mostly independent. Would that be right? So, I mean, this is something which the bigger brands are still wrestling with. Are they being sort of challenged now by these startups who understand this stuff and get it? Is there a challenge there, Lisa?
Oh yeah, sure. Absolutely. I do think that the bigger brands are kind of slightly bigger monoliths that need a little bit of help from independent brands, but that's been happening in terms of product development, trending ideas, how to communicate with customers. There's so much that these big behemoths need to learn from independent brands, and this is definitely one of those things, because it has been typically independent brands and not the mass market that has been catering to diverse consumers. In a way that, mass brands haven't been able to, because they're not looking for their diverse needs or the types of products that they would be interested in, or just even able to use, like foundation shades. And so when you have independent brands who are very agile and are able to create a great product quite quickly and kind of have a more agile marketing and flexible messaging to fit with that target audience, it's just a lot easier.
So Charlotte, could you talk a bit about, you've talked a bit about how you sort of have these conversations with the clients that you work with and the brands that come to you. I'd like to know a bit more about how, what happens next? What's the work that you do together? How do they work with your influencers? Just be interesting to see the sort of strategies that you employ to improve this situation.
So what we're focusing on at the moment is like a 360 approach. So we split it into team, so looking at their internal structure and what that looks like. Do they have people of colour employed? Do they have Black people employed? Are they listened to? Do they feel comfortable? Do they feel like they are heard, and then their stories are being told in the correct way? So that's one thing we look at. If they don't have any Black people, or in fact people of colour, which we have come across, we then link them with the right recruitment agencies. We talk to them about different ways that they can structure their team, creatives that they can reach out to ensure that they're, if not their team, because recruitment takes a long time sometimes, if not their official team, that their extended team when it comes to creative partnerships and projects is as diverse as possible, and ensuring that the storyteller is telling their own story. So that's one thing we look at. And then we look at their platform, so ways in which that they can use their platform to raise the voices for other people within, maybe within the industry, or the influencers that they work with, or talent, or anyone who they could give that leg up. Because what we're looking for at the moment is equity, giving people, like, equality isn't an easy task if people aren't on a level playing field. So giving people that leg up and going to agencies like myself, where we specifically work with people of colour, to get them in the faces of the brands, so that they're actively seeking that, to make sure that they're seen. And then the last thing we look at is industry, so how they can make a difference within the industry, how they can be the leaders, how they can make the change, and what they might need to do that. And I think this is working really nicely. We've done it so far with a couple of brands, and we're continuing to do so. And it's looking at not just your team and, doing unconscious bias training and like making sure that they know what they're saying is right or wrong. It's looking at ways in which they can actually make a difference, be that donations, be that working with charities. But like, I'm really hands-on. So rather than just donating, how can your team, do you have great PR, like a great PR team? Do you have a great creative team? Could you bring people in to do internships, apprenticeships, work experience? Do you have access to, maybe not now, but, like a really great venue that you can lend to an up and coming startup or a brand or a charity? Do you have desk space that you can just give out for free? So that's a small brand or a small company can not only have somewhere to have their company sit, but also learn from a bigger brand and be around that buzz. So it's all about figuring out how people can do more, but not just, because a lot of people are saying put your money where your mouth is, and I don't always think you need money, because a lot of brands are like, we haven't budgeted for this, I don't know what to do. And it's like, okay, let's forget about budget. What can you do that's actually going to make a difference in 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, a year? So now we're working on that with a few brands, and then as of next week we're reaching out to a few more, because we'll have a bit more capacity, just to, in case they don't know who we are, just to check everything's okay, the ones that we're a bit worried about looking on social media. And then we have a plan that 3 months after we put the strategies together for the brands, we then touch base again to check they've got objectives, so to check that the objectives have been reached, or where they are in that. And then we go back in 6 months, then we go back in a year. And that, I think, is the only way that we're going to see change, is just through accountability. So we make really clear KPIs that they need to hit, and if they don't hit it, it shows that they're not doing enough. And I think for me, is if you're doing what you said you're going to do, if you do more, that's great. But if you're doing what you said, what we've actually put into the plan, and people are happy, you're encouraging, growth within your industry, you're encouraging creatives and employees to flourish and, grow and move on. That's all we want to see, because this isn't a short-term goal. This is something that's going to take, we can't end 400 years of systemic racism in a strategy meeting. It's something that's going to go on for years, but if you start properly, then it should be easy to continue.
Yeah, I think that's a really crucial point, this idea of ensuring that these changes are long term, because clearly we are in this incredibly crucial moment right now. And obviously being in lockdown has emphasized that everybody's very online and everybody's aware of what's going on. And so this moment is quite crucial, but there's a danger of it dissipating as time goes on, as other crazy things happen in this crazy year. It would be interesting to hear from both of you actually, in terms of, how do you keep that? How do you sustain change? I mean, Lisa, I'd be interested to hear about the brands that you look to from in your work in the beauty industry, writing about the beauty industry, who you look to, who are sort of making the big changes but making them stick. Are there brands that are sort of the benchmarks for you in terms of doing things better? Well,
that's actually quite a difficult one, because I guess it depends on where we're talking about making things better and how.
Well, for instance, I mean, the sort of go-to reference point, I suppose, for beauty in terms of greater diversity and inclusivity would be Rihanna, I suppose. I mean, I could be wrong there. Please tell me if I'm wrong. But we've written about Fenty a lot. In terms of her marketing, it seems like it's a very forward-thinking brand. Is that a brand that you would look to, or are there others in the space who are more effective?
Well, I think it is exciting, because it does seem like there's a lot of interest and excitement surrounding that brand. It's obviously because it's Rihanna and she's amazing, and she has a great following, but she also has an incredibly great product which is very diverse. And I think what's exciting with these brands, and I'll put Pat McGrath in there with her brand as well. They're for everyone. They're Black owned, but they're creating product for Black people, for anyone can use these products. And I think that this is where, in terms of product development, we're looking at where brands are creating product that is accessible to all. And obviously that sounds very obvious, but it's actually been something that's very difficult. For example, in sunscreen, lots of Black people can't use specific sunscreens because it creates a white cast. So then you've got independent brands like Venus Williams's 11 sunscreen company that's now launched at Credo Beauty, and it's an incredible high performance sun cream that anyone can use, but Black people as well, because it doesn't leave a white cast. And it's looking, yes, it's about launching all of the foundation shades, because that's the minimum that you can do, but it's about also exploring products that kind of work across all races, all genders, all ages, to really have that truly inclusive message.
So you feel like the sort of long-term future for successful beauty brands is that sort of, rather than being very specifically focused on certain areas, it's about ensuring that there is something for everybody?
I would say so. I think that excites me, at least in terms of the stuff that we're looking at, a lot more than sort of keeping things inside a very tight box. How
do you feel about that, Charlotte?
I think you raised something that I talk about a lot. So for me, I genuinely believe any problem we have when it comes to race within any industry stems from recruitment. So if we think about the whole idea of sunscreen and how a lot of sunscreens leave a white cast, that is something that's gone on forever. And I can only use like a certain, so I have like 2 that I know that I can use and they work for my skin and also don't break me out. And that's not a race related thing, that's just a people thing. So we're very limited in general. And if you think about how that's made, so there would have been testing on multiple levels to get that sunscreen made. So were there no black people to be tested on? Were there no, Asian people? And if you think about from the beginning, the person who made that formula would not have had a darker skin tone. The people that they tested it on would not have had a darker skin tone. And if they did, then and it was important to the brand to be inclusive, then it wouldn't have got run, like that product wouldn't exist. Because if it works, we unfortunately live in a world that if it works on a white skin tone, and this is historical, then it's fine. But we don't think about any other skin tones. Plasters as an example. My dad, very dark skinned black man, has never, until recently, has never seen a plaster that matches his skin tone. And there was like that video that went viral on Facebook because the guy was like crying because he was so excited about it. And that seems silly, but that's like an everyday experience. Like imagine my skin tone, I'm quite like sandy, so I can probably have a darker beige would match my skin. But like my dad would never have a plaster. And I've never bought skin tone plasters as like an act of like political rebellion. And I always buy like Hello Kitty plasters or like random characters. And my boyfriend always asked, but why do you do that? And it wasn't until recently, since he saw that video last year, that he realized. I was like, but why would I buy something that isn't made for me, that doesn't fit my skin tone, that I couldn't use if I had kids, perhaps might not fit theirs? Like that doesn't make any sense to me. So this is something that we've always had to deal with. It's just quite interesting now we're being listened to, and people like have an interest in that. But I always say, it makes economic sense to be inclusive because people spend money on things that make them feel good and look good. That's always been, throughout time, that's always been a fact. So the stats I said earlier about cosmetics in the cosmetic industry, black people spending 80% more. We want to look good as our white counterparts. And unfortunately, those stats, if you think about it, it's probably because we have to spend 80% more. Because I had this conversation with a brand recently. They said, our foundations are really cheap and we don't, they're like really affordable, but we don't have that many shades. And I said, well, I've had to buy a £26 Estee Lauder foundation since I was 16 because there has never been a shade apart from that foundation in, a high, like a drugstore, to be American, drugstore brand, because they don't cater. Well, they in the past didn't cater to me. Even I remember my prom when I was 16, I got a number 7 foundation, which was probably the darkest at the time. And all my pictures, I learned how to Photoshop when I was 16, because all of my pictures from prom, I had a white cast because my foundation was at least 3 shades too light. And I had to learn then how to edit every single photo that was taken of me so that I didn't look like a ghost. So it's something that, and I'm really light skinned, so imagine someone with a darker skin tone, how would they have found foundations? I have no idea. So you have to think about it. The beauty industry hasn't, and cosmetics in general, has never really catered to anyone who doesn't have a lighter skin tone. Olive is probably like the darkest they've catered to, and now people are listening and they want to cater to them, which is amazing. And I think as a trend, that's the best trend to be put into place, listening to people who want to spend money on your product. It's fantastic.
It almost seems silly that like the needs of slightly darker skin would not be on their radar in the first place. But then, I feel like this is kind of, the movement and how things are going is kind of popping up in really interesting ways as well, like Crayola releasing the sort of 40 skin tone crayons, working with someone in the beauty industry to make that happen. But it's kind of little initiatives like that, and then also the darker plasters. They seem so silly and kind of almost throwaway little initiatives, but actually they, in the long term, they have the ability to sort of change the way we approach things.
Yeah. And also how we think. Something I said when we first started the talk was having conversations about race with people who don't necessarily have these conversations every day, even including my friends and family. A lot of questions have come up that they've not ever thought, because I mentioned them in my video, they've not ever thought about. And it's now people are having to think about these things, and they're the most common, you know, responses I'm getting in like my DMs or speaking to people about, you know, anything to do with race right now. They're saying, oh, I didn't know this, and I didn't know, you know, these things happened, I wasn't aware. And it's like, it blows my mind to think that people weren't aware of these things, but at the same time it's exciting to now know that they are aware of them and what could come from it.
Well, yes, fantastic. I mean, that is what's exciting, right? There's a, you know, a huge upswell of creativity, hopefully, that's going to come out of these conversations that we have, coming from a very important, serious, and challenging place, but hopefully creating a much more positive future for everybody. Well, thank you very much for joining us. I'd like to thank my guests, Charlotte Williams and Lisa Payne. That was a brilliant and fascinating conversation. And thank you for listening and watching. I hope you'll join us next time for more Future Thinking from Stylus.